Okay, there. All right. Now what I thought I'd do is just put up the agenda. And now I'm getting all kinds of messages about we're live streaming and all that stuff. Okay, so here's the agenda that you have, I think. We'll talk about the meeting with the Hispanic community, then revisit a topic we started to deal with, which was the topics for the comprehensive plan, this time talking about a schedule for them to get your thoughts about that. And then a review of the plan approach and the vision that I had drafted for the last time, and you've had some time to think about. And then in the spirit of moving forward, I thought we would take a crack at the first topic for discussion I've got listed, which is governance and administration, because I've got two agenda items under that would be fairly straightforward to deal with, I thought. And then we'll just talk about next meeting date and next steps. Does that sound good for everybody?
Yeah.
And if you can follow along in the handout. The meeting with the Hispanic community went very well. Judy Batista with the Power Organization organized it, and she was great. We ended up having 11 folks from the community, the mayor, Trustee Cheney, and myself in attendance. And so I thought I just share the results with you, and we can discuss any implications for the plan. It was really, I think, a very instructive, informative session, very positive. We started the discussion basically saying, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses of living in Warwick? Just as a way of getting the conversation started. And we went into a discussion pretty quickly. You can see on the strengths side, parks and scenic beauty, it was like the first thing people mentioned about what is it that makes the village worth living in. And then also different aspects of quality of life, access to the city by bus, the friendliness of the people, the diversity of restaurants, with the hint that it would be even better if there was even more diversity in dining. And then things like the Hispanic Day celebration, library programs, and embracing cultures as an important part of the community, and the fact that the Bill School does a cultural night is indications of the way in which the community is friendly and welcoming to the Hispanic population by and large. In terms of weaknesses, no surprise, traffic and circulation came up in the discussions also almost immediately. You can see where South Street parking was a problem. Better enforcement could be helpful. Getting crosswalks on South Street, that the ride from South Street to Main is very dangerous. People often run the red light at West and County Route 1. But a lot of the heart of the discussion in many ways was the discussion about economic opportunity. And one of the things that was really driving it was the idea that in the Hispanic community, which was pointed out within itself is a very diverse community. There are different cultures represented, different perspectives. But there was I think pretty close to unanimous thinking that there's really a hunger to start businesses, and the idea of that there might be ways to assist people interested in starting a business. Like one of the examples that was given almost immediately, there's no ability to translate legal documents from English to Spanish or vice versa in the village. Is there a way that service could be provided locally? And then there was a discussion also about the way the housing market, is impacting the Hispanic community in terms of often they're earning relatively low wages given the industries they're employed in, but they're having to cope with the fact that rents are going up community-wide. And that creates an issue. Second is that renting and leasing also now involves credit checks and sometimes 3-month security, which again, if you're just getting by, that can be a pretty substantial barrier. So that was, sort of two issues, again, where how do we promote entrepreneurism more effectively? How do we deal with the housing crisis? And also, there were a couple of issues on the quality of life side in terms of weaknesses. There was an indication that there's a fair amount of noise on West Street near Halligan's. It can be difficult to get medical insurance. The hospital is limited bilingual capacity to serve Hispanic patients. And also a discussion about how to get people better involved in the community. Some of the discussion focused on the schools and how to get parents more involved in what's happening in schools and more aware of what's going on and how they can participate, but also for the community in general. That was another part of the discussion, focus of the discussion. And then, as you saw in the handout, it seemed to me there were some recommendations basically that were coming out of the discussion. And one is just the idea that a comprehensive plan should be comprehensive, meaning for everybody, and to just reinforce that. And the importance of keeping the dialogue going. The participants indicated that the extent to which the village sends a clear sign to the community about welcoming diverse populations and again, like it says here, creating an environment where we can all play, where we can all participate. And as one of the participants said, we work hard and we want to taste justice and opportunity. And that, again, it comes down to everyday things matter, making sure the parents feel comfortable sends a clear sign to all citizens that they are welcome. In general, we need more education. And in this case, about the diversity of the Latino community. Again, there are different nationalities and different cultures with different customs, traditions, and values. And, it is helpful for people to be aware of that kind of diversity in that community. It would be helpful to have a leaflet for new residents, and that should be TS, not CE, sorry, with information about how to get services and various opportunities in the village. It was indicated that the relationship with the police is improving, and it's always would be helpful to have someone who speaks Spanish on the force. An example of a specific recommendation that came out is it would be helpful to have a sign in Spanish for public restrooms, just to make it easier for Hispanic visitors and others to find them. Because usually when you start looking for a restroom, time is of the essence. So if you are not sure what the sign is saying, it can sort of add to the anxiety of the experience. So that's the.
Do we have any public restrooms beyond the one that's in Stanley Deming?
Not that I'm aware of. And that's one of the discussions that we'll talk about during this process is
in Memorial Park, there are some, associated with the concession stands.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, and of course the library,
The library, yes.
okay. The library is they're
probably the nicest public restrooms we have. Sorry, Michael, don't take that personally.
I don't. They're beautiful. I go
Yes.
there. I like to visit.
Okay, thank you.
And
Yeah, and
Peter,
yes.
you had mentioned when you were talking about traffic and circulation, you said South Street parking is a problem, but it says here that South Street speeding
Yeah, I'm sorry.
is
Yes,
a problem. Okay.
It was speeding that's the issue. I'm sorry, I misspoke. And Barry Cheney is joining us. And I don't know, Michael or Barry, if you want to add anything else, you both attended the session. Again, I thought it was a pretty positive session. I think some Useful
I-
information.
Yeah, I thought it was very good. And what was really helpful was there was enough people who could translate. So it went pretty smoothly and effectively. The whole business discussion to me was the thing that really emanated because, this is, either first or second generation folks that are really trying to make something of themselves and the struggle. I mean, we had the Empanada Land guy, there who brought us empanadas.
Yes.
And, his story of how he has started this business was really unbelievable and fascinating. And but if there was structural ways of helping small businesses in our community, not only for Hispanics, but for everyone, I think that would be really something very, very good.
Yeah, agreed. Carly, your hand.
Yeah, I was thinking about how during both, it seems like a common thread between your meeting with the Black community specifically and the Hispanic Spanish speaking community. Both were talking about representation. Both talked about kind of convening groups, it seems, to kind of help ensure that there's representation. And one of the questions that I have is, our comprehensive plan committee is like made up of all white folks, and we're going to be meeting monthly. So it seems like there's a lot of more stuff that needs to be done. Is there an opportunity to increase the diversity of this committee? Like whether or not, were there folks that came forward that might be interested in participating, from the engagement that you've conducted so far?
Yes, I think that's true. And I think it's up to the committee to make that determination how you want to proceed. Obviously one of the balance here is to make sure we have a number that's not unwieldy. And I think we could add one or two without getting into that realm. I think we could do that without any loss of efficiency from my sense, but I'm interested to hear what other folks have to say.
I think that's a good idea.
I do too. And I think there's a dynamic there that is so important as we are moving forward.
I know the Knights of Columbus works closely with the Warwick area migrant community with Kathy Brigger, who does a lot with the Hispanic population, I guess more towards the Pine Island area, but certainly I think it does include some in Warwick. And also we do have a Spanish Mass every once a month at St. Stephen's, which attracts a lot of the Spanish community to that as well.
And what we might want to do is just follow up with the folks that were in the meeting and organizing. Again, Judy Batista, I don't know whether she'd be interested. I don't, it's the committee's choice about who would.
She would be very good if she was willing, because she has a relatively long history here and she has seen a lot of changes. And she, her outreach to the Hispanic community is broad, with, many of the different cultures of that community. So, and that's why we had such diversity around the table.
Yeah, she did an amazing job bringing that group together. She's very good at getting people to show up. It was pretty impressive. And there was food. So do we want to extend an invitation?
I think it's a good idea. Any
other thoughts?
I was not at the meeting with the African American community, but I mean, there's a couple folks that I think would be pretty incredible. One of them is Chanabelle Latham. She is a dynamo and a village resident, so that would be, I think, pretty good. But I could put my feelers out for that.
Yeah, that would be great. And I think the sooner we can do that, the better, because we are at the point where we're going to be starting to look at recommendations. So if we can make that happen over the next month, that would be great. And also, as part of that process, I'd be happy to meet with whoever is coming onto the committee to sort of give them an orientation and answer any questions they may have.
And I don't think this is this is a replacement for, any continued engagement with those communities. It's just sort of increasing the diversity of our panel in response to this observation.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no, I agree. So any other comments, thoughts about that session or just the issue of the committee composition? So I guess probably maybe just Mayor, if you, Barry, and I just follow up in terms of working out the invitations and that sort of thing. That would make sense. The next item on the agenda is the questions of starting to look at the topics to be included in the plan, some of the recommendations. And what I've just done here in this slide is just laid out a potential schedule. The handout you have has got more details in terms of what's involved in each of those. But what I'm putting forward, and this is just a suggestion, folks could, feel free to alter, revise, amend, omit as makes sense. But the idea would be October, meaning tonight we talk about the governance and administration recommendations, or at least start the discussion. November, we deal with environmental sustainability. December, transportation, parking, and recreation. That Bill Springnether of Alta has said he's available on the 20th of December. So I'm thinking if we could lock that time in terms of the December meeting, then we can deal with that topic at that meeting. January, economic vitality. February, civic life, culture and the arts. March, housing and neighborhoods. And then April, start to review the draft plan. Because the idea here isn't we deal with economic vitality in January and the door is closed on any further discussion of that, but basically putting together the elements for a first draft and then going from there. Carla, you have your hand raised.
I was just going to say, so we're starting with governance and administration. When we review the draft plan, it might make sense for us to revisit that in the wake of all of the recommendations.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this is almost like a practice session because, we've got two items under the category that give a sense of how we'd approach this. And that's right. I think as we go through this, we revisit it and revisit the others. And basically the way I see this going forward is prior to the November meeting. Again, if it's a Monday, then I would try to get it to you by Friday, maybe even a little earlier. The background material on environmental sustainability. In this case, it's pretty much, it would be best practices that I'm putting together in terms of responding to questions about environmental sustainability, reviewing the floodplain and flood area map. So you'd have that kind of background. And then we just go through the potential recommendations and have a discussion and do that for each of these. Yes, Barry.
Yeah, just stepping back, the 20th of December is a village board meeting.
Okay. Oh, well.
Oh, well.
So we'll figure something out.
Peter, in all those topics, could health be an issue or something that is integrated in one of them?
Well, it could, but it might be its own thing. I mean, what are you thinking about? Like something related?
Well, I'm just thinking that a healthy community is a really important aspect of us, of who we are in our future and our children, and how we approach health. And it all ties into everything that we're talking about. whether it's recreation or culture or economic vitality, housing, our neighborhoods, but it all speaks to that. And, walkability is part of what a healthy community needs, and walking paths and bicycling, all that. So yeah, it could be its own thing, or it could be tied with something else. But I just think it's a topic that is of growing importance. And it's not only just physical health, it's also psychological health. And, because that's what we see here at Village Hall. So I'm sure at the library, you see some of that too.
Yeah, and what we might want to do, I mean, just so to give you a little more context, I try to get through these things as quickly as possible, these things being comprehensive plans. And I always try to do it within a year. And that's just me. Because once you get to 2 years, everybody's forgotten what happened in the prior year, and it's difficult. But on the other hand, I don't want this to be rushed such that it doesn't give full coverage to important issues. So what we might want to do is, for example, in April, to have health kind of on the agenda, to just review all the other topics and say, are there aspects of health that just haven't been addressed or left out that we need to either integrate into other recommendations or create recommendations on their own. How do people feel about that approach to health? Question number one. Question number two, how do people feel about the 1 year deadline, which would be, probably May, for getting this done? And again, there's a way in which that's arbitrary, but there's a way in which it's not, because, to get this done before people get bored of it, or it just drifts off into irrelevance. So let's do health first. Yes, I see Carly, you've got your hand raised.
You don't have to always call on me first. I feel like I talk a lot, but
You're the first one raising your hand, so I'm calling on people raise their hands.
I agree with the mayor that health is intrinsic to each one of these topics. And so maybe it's just something that every time we meet, we talk about the, sort of the, in the planning world, we call it like the human-centric approach. Like, we talk about the implications to quality of life and to physical and mental health and well-being. And we just, and maybe we make sure that that's on the agenda, that we reflect on that every time. Would that, Mayor, do you think that meets the need of what you're looking for?
Yes, I think so.
Great.
I just don't want it to get lost in the shuffle, of so many important topics.
And, Carly, maybe you could be like the health maven, just to remind us at every session if it doesn't get dealt with. Scott.
Yeah, it occurs to me with that suggestion about considering health. I don't think we've talked much about the presence of a community hospital, which is interesting because now that I think about it, it's a topic that does come up from time to time among people who are saying, I like living in a community with a hospital nearby. And that's another angle on health, I think, that maybe could be specifically addressed if it were an individual topic rather than sort of folding that into everything else.
We also have many levels of care in our community. We have a large amount of senior housing, and that is one thing. Some of it's subsidized, some of it is high end, but it's all mixed. And then we also have, assisted living and different levels of assisted living, from, sort of a more, basic assisted living to a more essential assisted living between Sevier and Mount Alverno, which are all part of the hospital. So, not many communities have that. That's pretty amazing. You don't really have to leave home. It's all here, so. And I don't want to take this down this rabbit hole, but I think.
No, you know, as someone has just in the last number of years had to deal with aging parents and all of that, which is only one aspect of health, but it seems like it might be worth thinking about that whole system. You know, there's the health aspects in terms of policy, but then there's the sort of the infrastructure related to health, which extends from trails to senior housing to the hospital. And it might be worth, and it doesn't have to be an entire session, but it's just thinking, are there things that village policy could do to strengthen that network, to protect it, to improve it in some way?
Yeah, I want to append my previous comment. Like, I think it is something that we should reflect on in each session because there's different dimensions, but I do agree. I think that there's enough there that it should be talked about specifically.
You know what we might do is at least start the discussion when we're talking about housing in neighborhoods. I don't know if that's just to talk about the systemic aspects of health promotion in the village. But you know, to continue the practice of thinking about health and well-being in every topic that we talk about. But there is the system, and I think it's good, as you pointed out, it's going to become more important over the years. I mean, it already has. COVID is sort of the wake-up call to, you know, that we need to think systematically about parks as part of public health. I mean, you know, they played a huge role in COVID, in the response to COVID, everywhere. So why don't we, if that makes sense, we can, you know, include in March, in addition to housing in neighborhoods, just sort of the health systems or systems related to health. Does that? And if it's too big, then we end up just doing an extra session about the health system, you know, the next month. Does that sound okay to folks?
Yeah, sounds good.
And also the other question number 2 was the schedule. And you know, what folks feel about the schedule. And I see Susan has raised her hand.
You're muted.
Thank you. I agree with Peter's comment that we can lose track of what we've accomplished, but I also like the idea of doing it in a year because we asked a number of residents to invest some time to take surveys, to talk to us on the street. And I'm already getting questions. So what are the results? I don't want to leave them hanging for more than till next May.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with Susan.
Lastly, I think it's a good discipline to have an end date, and without it, we can just kind of wither away.
Amen. Completely agree. So yeah, so let's stick with this schedule, and you know, we can always adjust. One of the things that might be possible is we may be able to deal with 2 topics in one meeting, you know, if it works out. We also could do special meetings, which is probably not, given everybody's schedule, I don't think that's going to be likely, but it's, you know, if need be, we could always do that, like double up a couple months.
You can extend the meeting too, once in a while.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think some of these are going to be a little longer than typical, just as we
Right.
get into discussions. So we're going to go with this schedule then, as is, and probably what I'll do is make it a practice at each subsequent meeting just to review where we are in the schedule. Susan, do you still have a comment? Your hand is still raised, or maybe it's newly raised.
Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to run by you folks again is that that idea of the plan approach of the plan vision. And this is kind of the latest version of it. And again, I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time on this, but it would be helpful if folks would take a look at it and give some feedback. The idea here is really to provide a sense of what are some of the outcomes that overall we'd like to see come from this work. So this is again a first attempt to describe that.
I would say some concrete examples that can be implemented would grow out of the plan. Things that can be not only decided upon in some way, but that could be implemented with certain timeframes.
Okay. So the idea is to come up with some actionable items as you know,
Right.
I think we also celebrate our history with George Washington Day and our sesquicentennial and all kinds of celebrations that make us remember our roots. So I'd like to add that to the arts, culture, and civic life.
Okay, well, actually, it's the first bullet where it says walkable human scale development that provides
In a sense,
place and a sense of history.
yeah, we definitely have a sense of history. And you're right, it's related to a sense of place. And that I think is because we're so grounded in the village that we live in, which is historic.
So we could just do celebrations of art, culture, civic life, and history, and our history.
It's okay as it is. I agree that we're going to cover it one way or another.
Okay. Any other reactions? And there's no need to be, there's very little pride of authorship. There's probably some, but be happy to take any questions, criticisms.
Peter, I have a quick question, and I don't know quite if this is related to this or not. Where do you think we'll be talking about, like, dealing with visioning around the fact that Warwick is in some ways a population receiving area when people are migrating from highly populated regions for a variety of reasons, and both the risks and opportunities that are associated with that, and how that is probably going to not let up in the near future?
Yep. Well, I think like the housing in neighborhoods.
That's where you see it.
That's one of the, it's sort of like health. It's going to show up in a few places. The economic vitality, it'll certainly be in there also.
Yeah, because I see that as under this, like, sustainability and resilience in the face of climate change. Like, that's like one of the biggest ways that we'll probably be affected, I guess, in my perspective.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. There are consequences, I guess that's the best way to put it, of being a successful community. That you're suddenly in demand in a way that you wouldn't be if the sense of place wasn't so strong, if the Main Street wasn't so vital, and things like that. And that that does have to factor into our thinking about this plan. And that's sort of what this sort of approach where it talks about Warwick playing a unique role as a location where people gather face to face to participate in and celebrate those things. That, you know, that's one of the consequences of the success of Warwick to date, of the village to date, is people value it for that kind of face to face participation. And, you know, people are going to come from all over to do that and to live here to participate in it. So that's kind of the context of the planning process itself, is that that's going to happen. It also will ebb and flow. As those of you that were involved in planning in the mid to late 80s, you'll remember the big concern was we're going to be overwhelmed with population. Our schools are going to blow up. It's just going to be awful. And then, you know, 15, 20 years later, 25 years later, it's like, well, where are all the school kids? So, you know, these things come and go, but for the foreseeable future, I think that's one of the contexts is there are consequences, mostly good, but some issues related to being a successful place that's in demand on the part of people coming from larger areas.
Well, affordable housing is going to be an issue in the future.
Yeah, I think it already is. Yep.
Right.
And then when we get to the housing and neighborhoods discussion, that's a lot of the discussion is going to be about that. How do we strike the balance? How do we do that in a way that strengthens neighborhoods, maintains and improves diversity?
That may also be a bullet that's missing, or something related to that is missing from the November agenda.
This year? And, you know, what in particular? The bullet says climate smart communities, zoning districts, zoning for post-disaster activities, those kinds of things.
Subdivision regulations, yeah, like PDR and where that's going. That might be important for us to talk about.
Okay.
I don't know whether that falls within.
Well, again, that's another one where I think we just have to bring it up when it matters. Like environmental sustainability, it's there. It'll be in housing and neighborhoods, and probably even economic vitality. So do we want to start talking about the first topic, or do we want to, anything else we need to revisit, review? So this is, you know, in the discussion so far with the different groups, these are the three things that have come out as specifically related to just governance. You know, how are things done as opposed to what should be done? And what, you know, one is to hold an annual joint meeting of the village boards. Second would be to promote an annual joint meeting of the civic groups active in the village. And the, you know, the difference between the first is that those are clearly all government boards. So the idea of the village convening that makes a lot of sense. The second one, they're civic groups. So the question is, what exactly would the village's role be in that? Is it a convener? Is it just encouraging it? And then the third topic that came out of this was the idea of creating a committee of BIPOC and Hispanic residents to do two things. One is to keep the village government informed about issues in those communities, so that there could be an appropriate response. But secondly, also as opportunities for volunteer positions, let's say it's on boards or whatever, become available, that the members of those communities are aware, and should they want to participate, they can. Because you know, that's something that's has been a lot discussed in planning circles, is one of the difficult things about getting more diversity in volunteer positions is the lack of communication, so that the communities aren't aware that the positions are available or don't know, how to make themselves available should the positions come open. So any thoughts about any of these, or are there other aspects of governance that we need to talk about? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the share at this point, because everybody has seen this. In this way, we give you a little more face-to-face. So maybe let's just start with the idea of the annual joint meeting of the village boards. I think that's a pretty that would be hard to oppose, I think. But any thoughts about that as a recommendation?
I think that's low hanging fruit that our elected officials can execute easily.
Yeah, that's part of the reason we're starting with this topic. Is, there's a good example of a.
Peter, in the age of Zoom, I think people recognize that it's so much easier. It's less herding of cats, and people can usually adjust their schedule, accordingly. They don't have to be, in one room, which makes it easier for the village because our space is limited. But via Zoom, hey, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing that in every community I'm working with, that there's a barrier that's been broken through, and it's like everybody gets, if you need to do these kinds of meetings, Zoom just makes it so much easier.
Yeah, I personally think it should be at least twice a year. We're all discussing issues that are going in front of multiple boards, right? It's not uncommon on the planning board to hear something that just came from the ZBA to the planning board, maybe go back to the ZBA. So at least having a kind of a baseline, I think that would be helpful at least twice a year.
I agree, Tom. And especially with the idea that in some cases things rest on special use permits that have to go through the village board, and yet it goes through, let's say, the planning board, and we really don't, except for the minutes, we don't have any real context or feedback. So I think it's pretty critical.
Yeah, so the recommendation would be for at least twice per year. And I think we'll incorporate the idea of virtual meetings in the recommendation as well, just to make it clear that whatever it is that makes it easier for folks to do that.
And, I also think that going into each one of those meetings, having a detailed agenda, for example, there's a couple of developments going on that's in front of the planning board every month, every other month, right? So understanding, ZBA's or ARB's perspective, I at least for me would be very helpful on the planning board side.
Yeah, it's very silo-esque.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we can do that. And again, at least twice per year in virtual format. Because it was also just a great discussion when the boards got together. And that kind of discussion would continue. What about anything more about that recommendation? And just also by way of keeping the discussion going about these topics, it's important to keep in mind that the comprehensive plan kind of sets the general direction. And there are times where it makes sense to be specific about recommendations, and there's times where it's really important to just make sure the values to be furthered are reflected. Like I find it's more helpful when talking about policy to suggest here are the outcomes that we want. Let's say, for example, greater diversity in housing, rather than to tie it to a specific zoning provision, where if that doesn't fly 2 years down the road, then the comprehensive plan is silent on the issue. Whereas if we can clearly talk about what are the principles we're trying to forward, what are the kinds of techniques that we want to have to accomplish those principles, to me, that sends a direction that should be specific enough to get a sense of what is desired and what are the kinds of tools that could be used without tying it to a particular tool. Again, so that way, if that particular tool doesn't work or isn't supported, then the plan doesn't have anything more to say. So that you'll just, that's kind of a warning that that's the way I tend to write the draft recommendations for your review, is to think about what are the principles, what are the techniques as a guide for that.
And I feel like it almost becomes like kind of, it's almost project based, like kind of looking at something that comes up and, okay, we should bring in these two groups. And then so someone kind of assesses each individual project or thing that comes through, let's say the planning board, and they're like, oh, well, we should bring in this group and this group. And someone kind of like puts together almost like a team to kind of analyze it as a group versus just kind of, you know, like the mayor said, doing it in our silos and no one really knows what the other person's thinking. So it becomes more of a conversation between the groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that may be a little refinement on this is, you know, for example, to put together project teams for particular projects, because there may be a complicated project that comes down the road where every board really should be in constant discussion about this. And if there's delegates that are on a task force just to see it through and report back to their respective boards, that for a certain project that may work. That may be the best way to do it.
And it may expedite the project being approved or disapproved, and therefore encourage better economic development here in Warwick.
Mm-hmm.
It has done that in other communities where the various boards meet on a regular basis and share information.
The other piece of that, Peter, is that, you know, there's housing trends that happen, building trends that happen, and they're always changing, they're always evolving. And it would be great if we had those indications that all of a sudden, every person who's coming for an application has to be sent to the ZBA, you know, because our zoning does not encompass, you know, this type of building. And maybe it should, and maybe it should be looked at so that it can evolve faster than waiting, you know, 10 years. So I think that would be important too.
Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion, because typically that only happens during the comprehensive planning process, where there's, you know, well, are there a lot of projects that are referred to the ZBA? Oh, we need to change that, make a recommendation to change that zoning. And like you said, then 10 years later, that's revisited. Whereas if it can be done on an ongoing basis through like a project task force in these regular meetings, that creates like a real-time capacity to keep the zoning up to date.
In the spirit of the comprehensive plan being like a light in the distance that guides us in the right direction, I think we should also include signposts that sort of let us know that we are in the right direction, not so far as metrics, like not like we need to achieve X specific percent of blah, 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 but signposts that we're heading in the right direction, and also that we might not be heading in the right direction so that we can course correct.
Mm-hmm. And we'll have to think about that. I think that's a very good suggestion. We'll have to, for each of the recommendations, we'll have to think about what would be appropriate signposts. Again, this is different from a work plan and from.
Yeah, but we shouldn't really have a recommendation without knowing whether we are, like, how we're going to know that we're heading in the right direction and that we're on the right track, because that would be, I think, important guidance for, you know, any future elected officials.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. We'll have to work on that, but I think that's, and also for whoever reads the plan to be able to say, oh, okay, this is what they're doing, and based on what's happened over the last 3 months, it looks like they're more or less on track, or, you know, maybe we're moving away from what we should be doing or how we should be thinking about this.
Yeah, and that keeps it from becoming like a list of platitudes.
Good. Other comments about either the idea of the joint meeting of the boards or just the structure of the comprehensive plan, because this is in itself is a useful discussion for me. You know, as I mentioned last time, I want this to be as short as humanly possible and graphically oriented so people can look at it and go, okay, this is what the Village of Warwick is about in terms of growth and development. And those signposts could be helpful in that same way. It may have to be a separate section or something, but to be able to say, all right, if you're doing this right, this is what you should be seeing.
Well, and I think that also points to the value of like bookending this conversation, this like long conversation with conversations about governance, right? Because at the end of this, once you have identified all of these recommendations that are supposed to be implemented over the course or, you know, move toward over the course of the next 10 years or whatever, are we set up to meet all of these needs? You know, what are the gaps?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, the intent is obviously to have a work plan at the end of when the thing is done. But also I think just conceptually to be able to get a sense of, you know, how are we doing? In addition to what have we accomplished? Is it getting us where we need to go?
You know, Peter, for those aspects of meeting, either, you know, municipal meetings of different committees or boards, or meeting with civic organizations, or meeting with specific ethnic groups, I think it also speaks of something of the role of government. So the role of governance, and it's not just a board that sits around a table and is, you know, the the definer. You know, it's really such a dialogue, and I think that's critical for the public to understand that. And I think our board has truly tried to define that on many levels, and it's not a board of no, it's a board of let's see what can we do, and or how can this happen, or how can we make this idea real. And I don't know if that exists everywhere, but I know it exists here, and I'm proud of that. But I think that should be part of what we talk about, because you know, this board is not going to be there forever, but I think it's something that any board should aspire to.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. The thing that often makes places work or prevents them from working is the culture. And what you just described with that idea of instilling and encouraging dialogue as a way of doing business in the boards, that's worth memorializing in the comprehensive plan. Because, you know, it's something that you folks are already good at, and the extent you can get better at it, that's even better for the community. But it's, yeah, that sort of the role of governance, the posture of government in civic life. I think that it's worth articulating that in the plan.
Yeah, how community members and our local government relate. Like, what is that relationship?
And I think setting the expectation, really, of that dialogue and discussion is expected and is going to be encouraged. Good. Other thoughts about governance? Because this has been really helpful.
I don't know if it's relates directly to governance, but I noticed there was an attachment to your agenda, which is the report from Lou Marquette on a number of items that he suggested could be possible items for projects within the village. And, you know, for instance, the bathroom needs for a public bathroom. And one of the suggestions was building a building next to the 1810 house in Lewis Park, and which ironically, the Historical Society, at least the executive director and the president, are very much think that's a great idea. And the Lewis Park is divided into 4 or so plots, so you could certainly sell the plot if that was the way, you know, to build such a both a visitor center and a bathroom or something. You know, these are, I think, things that we would hope might grow out of the plan, and people would be asking down the line, what are actions taken, you know, on the infrastructure, for instance? Do we need new water pipes in the village to get rid of the flushing and the rust and things like that? You know, these are all, I think, things that people live here, talk about and are interested in.
Yep. Yeah, and I think I was going to bring that to folks' attention towards the end of the session, the memo that Lou Marquette had put together, because you'll see a lot of things that are there reflect concerns and topics that folks have brought up.
Right.
And he also has some interesting specific recommendations about public restrooms, which I think we can revisit.
Right.
Anything else? Let's talk about the 2 specific recommendations to the promoting the annual meeting of civic groups. How do we want to address that? Is that something the village should seek to convene, or the village should just support the idea and encourage the groups to bring themselves together?
Well, for the civic groups I'm involved with, I think just knowing that there is this intention to have a meeting, and, you know, to ask the president or whoever's in charge of that group to be present, or send a delegate to be present. I think, you know, once you know it exists, or the thought exists, then I think people will respond, because we often meet collectively among ourselves, like Rotary might meet with the Knights on some project, or, you know, things like that. So
I wonder if something that on that broad a scale maybe won't happen just with general encouragement, but it could be implemented as an annual service project that one or another of those groups might take on or rotate, so that there could be a template for the event, and it could just be produced each year by one or more of those organizations, or rotate, as I said. I'm imagining the Boy Scout units, for example, could take that on, maybe on a rotating schedule. If there was some sort of a template that said, hey, you know, here's how this operates. You know, here are a couple of different locations where it could be had, you know, things like time of day, invitation lists, and so on could be sort of templated. And then somebody has to play host for it each year, get the invitations out, pick a date, so on.
Yeah. So maybe, certainly there could be a description of the potential template in the plan recommendations. It also might be, the recommendation would be the village would convene the first one with the expectation that in subsequent years, everybody takes a turn.
I favor that approach. I think that in the long term, the civic organizations themselves need to organize their own efforts, but without a convening authority who sets something up, I don't think it's going to work very well. And I'm sure that if the village initiated something, there would be civic organizations that would immediately come to help develop that template. But somebody has to take the initiative and say, this is a good idea, and this is vaguely the way we want to do it. Can you join me?
Yeah, I agree with Susan. It would be hard to pass it around, just because of the logistics, and maybe even the discipline of it happening every year or multiple times of the year. What is interesting, it happens now in reverse, actually, where myself and a board member are invited to the Rotary or to the Historical Society or to, you know, the Lions Club or any So we go there and, you know, give that information or connection, but then there isn't that, I don't know, kind of comprehensive connection of all these community groups and how they interact. I mean, one of the issues that we have, of course, is our calendar. As activities, you know, open up again, the calendar gets filled. Everybody wants to use the same parks at the same time, same days and same hours, you know. And so how do you contend with that? And how do you come up with a yearly calendar even of, and maybe that's where that has to happen, you know, in the lull of winter before, you know, the real active season starts, and we can start talking about that, and maybe it's not just one meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think tied to village facilities, that makes a lot of sense. Like they're all, you know, they're going to use the parks, and you don't want 5 groups choosing that same time, same day, and then, you know, being frustrated or, you know, not being able to maximize the benefit of that particular activity. Whereas if the groups come together in a downtime, then they can coordinate those things more effectively for themselves and for the community. So
it's also nice. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it also is nice to come together for something so positive during like the dreariest time of the year. So that's a good reason to do it during that time frame.
I'm not sure, you might find some of those organizations maybe plan on a different cycle.
That's true.
The park season certainly, as you mentioned, is sort of summer season, but school and the scout calendar, for example, typically run summer to summer.
Yeah, so those details will have to be worked out, but the idea then would be that the village is the convener of at least the initial meeting.
Getting the full list of civic organizations could be challenging, but Hello Warwick Valley has compiled one, so we could share that.
And it's one of those things where that's the starting point, and it may be in subsequent years, new groups show up and they're invited, and you just have to.
You know, I go back to the Zoom approach only because it does make things so much easier. But I look back during the pandemic when we had to have some very critical meetings with the merchants who had to shut their businesses down, and how we as government could help them through whatever they, you know, whatever it was, or what they needed. And the other thing especially was the restaurants, and to get, you know, a multiple amount of the restaurants on these Hollywood squares was really phenomenal, because to hear what they had to say, it was easier to do it this way than to ask them to, you know, come to Village Hall and to sit around a table. I don't think I would have gotten as many people that were there. And really they set the stage for, you know, us to help them in so many ways. So.
Yeah, so that idea of, again, virtual meetings and appropriate technology to make this more easy for the participants. Good. All right, the last one is the Committee for the BIPOC and Hispanic Residents. Any thoughts about that recommendation? Thoughts about how it should be structured?
I'm only curious as to why it should be a committee instead of a liaison. Getting a whole committee together is much more difficult than getting a liaison. Now, I understand in the Hispanic community, there's such diversity that it may be necessary to have a committee, but I can't see getting a committee. I think it's a more difficult proposition to get a committee than it is to start with a liaison and develop a committee. Maybe the liaison that is selected to work with us should take on that chore. They might be in the best position to do that. And I think Carly had a terrific idea in diversifying our attendance.
Yeah, yeah, I think it was called for. So the thought is just hold off on the specifics of this recommendation until we have broader representation on the committee itself.
You know, I think that type of sharing comes a lot through the spiritual community. Pastor Rolfe, the UAME Church, there is, and other groups that do kind of coalesce. And I think Susan's correct in that a liaison would be much more, I think, efficient in terms of getting that information to, to the village board.
Okay. So the idea would be to establish a liaison role.
And if it develops into a committee, so much the better.
Okay.
I think it would be important though to make sure that that annual joint meeting also has diverse representation on it.
Absolutely.
So,
Which the joint meeting of the boards?
the civic group.
Civic group.
Yeah, because, yeah.
And I can't help wondering if, as I mentioned, the spiritual community is kind of a very strong group unto itself. I mean, I could see just meeting with those leaders. That would be, because, their organizations are having events or activities, parades, whatever, and they're planning things that they need, village facilities. So I could see that, and then that would actually create a very diverse group.
So we might want this recommendation to have alternatives. Like it could be a liaison, it could be a regular meeting with the spiritual community, and we'll just have to figure out which of those work in practice best.
Well, and could, like when we talk about civic groups, could that be inclusive of religious communities?
Yeah, I don't think there's.
I think that's a question. That's a question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I think positive. Yes, I imagine civic groups as being broader than we've typically talked about. Sort of the very visible handful of civic groups that are prominent in the community, but there's a wide variety of civic groups, I think, that would benefit from a general discussion, a high-level discussion of use of shared resources and annual calendar. All of these groups have some sort of an annual plan of some sort, and that it seems to me that that's the focus of this get together is let's put the annual calendar, major events and events that typically conflict for use of shared resources out for the consideration of the entire community.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't this, I guess I misunderstood then, because what I was thinking when I was looking at that was that these civic groups they represent broad cross sections of our community, and they also represent specific interests, like the Historical Society is interested in, and then the Wickham Works is interested in arts and culture. And so I was thinking that these folks are meeting together, but then also with representatives of like our elected officials to make sure that their interests are being heard, so that it's both like a sharing and an opportunity to make sure that that what they're hearing and seeing in the community is also being transferred. So and maybe I just misunderstood. Yeah.
Well, in terms of the discussion that came out of the meeting with the civic groups, it was really about bringing the groups together to talk about the idea of the calendar, shared resources, and that sort of thing.
Okay, I got it. Sorry, Scott. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I think I've got guidance to refine these recommendations. The way I would see this working generally is at the next meeting, we would move on to the next topic, but you would also have the revised draft based on the previous discussion.
I agree.
We start to accumulate this stuff, and there may be at some point in some meeting we might have to stop and look at how these things are coming along, and to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of which draft is the operative draft and that sort of thing. But I think we can do that.
And then once we have that, so the process is that we talk about a topic, and then the next meeting we look at the revised topic. At that point, are you posting, the revision up on the website or anywhere to?
I think we could do that. I mean, the website.
Then you can get rolling feedback. Mm-hmm.
Right. But it's those topics that have already been vetted once, where we talked about them, we've made the revisions. So that's the draft. Those are the draft recommendations or draft thoughts, and those can go up on the website for larger discussion. That would be good.
Peter, in thinking about the whole idea of groups coming together and meeting, maybe one specific group are the folks, the leagues that use our parks. We have baseball, football, now rugby. It's just kind of an important thing, at least to touch base. And Barry, I don't know what you might think about that, because you obviously have involvement with a number of those leagues. So what do you think if there was to be some kind of yearly meeting of sharing, just to say, okay, what is there anything that you have planned for the season that we don't, we should know about, or what are the problems, what are your issues, are the lights good enough, or do you need more lights, all that could come out at a roundtable discussion.
I definitely think it would be helpful to have the groups get together, because they do share space. I think that's probably something that could be handled by the liaison to the trustees, because it really is a parks trustee issue.
Right.
But certainly to have that dialogue is very important and would be very helpful, I think, to the board as well as to the organizations represented.
So there's an additional meeting focused on the use of recreational facilities, parks and recreational facilities. Good. Other thoughts about the question of governance and administration as it relates to the community?
The Spanish community issues that were brought up even earlier, it almost seems like there could be an office of Spanish support or something along that line when we talk about where they could go to get documents translated for translation needs, things along that line. It seems like that is something that's missing right now in our village, and almost a person, either part of the village government or something that evolves from that, to be the liaison or the person in charge, whether it's a paid position or whatever, to deal with that. I think it sounds like there's the need.
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing, that we do have one of my staff speaks fluent Spanish, and so that is a very important and helpful thing. And I mentioned this at that meeting, the municipal identification has become a very important tool for the Hispanic community, and it gives them not only does it give them a form of identification, picture ID, but it also gives them a sense of ownership and pride and a sense of place, as we all talked about. So, that is, in some ways, but I agree, Jack, it could be expanded. I'm not so sure how we do it, but.
No, well, that sounds like you've got a good start.
Yeah.
I think that the library might serve as a good resource for this. It seems to be the kind of fit. They're welcoming. They're there a lot of hours, including on the weekends, and they have resources such as the ability for somebody to get online and use tools available there.
Yeah.
Or the community center. The community center is really kind of under the radar sometimes, but it's really such an important piece of our life here, and that would be a wonderful addition.
Yeah. But right now, I think the library has more resources to be able to put a program like this in place than the community center would.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and part of this could be even just seeing if the local small business development center would be willing to do hours at the library, with the understanding that the clientele they may be meeting with may be Spanish, so would they have the capacity to do that?
It sounds like maybe part of it too would be increasing the awareness, Mayor Newhart, of that you have a staff member that is bilingual and that these resources do exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and most of our signage is multi-language, and our website is completely translatable. You can translate it into many, many different languages. So, but yes, awareness.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll have to think about that as well as part of that response. Okay, any other thoughts about governance and administration? All right. I did want to bring to your attention the last pages of the handout, which had the walking tour results from April 6th and 7th that Lou Marquette had put together. Again, I think what a lot of this does is kind of reinforce much of what we've heard already from the community in terms of what the problems are and what the possible opportunities could be. So I would encourage you to review that. And we'll be revisiting a lot of those issues in the months ahead. So I guess, now the next step is really to talk about next meeting date. Now we're starting to get into the lovely holiday season. And it is lovely, but it makes meetings sometimes problematic. So for the month of November,
Village board meets on the 1st and the 15th.
okay. How's the 29th? Does that work for folks? 6 o'clock? And that may, that may be more of a 2-hour meeting, just by way of warning, because we're going to start to do some of the, start to deal with the question of sustainability and resilience, and I think that'll be a robust discussion. And
Is that Hanukkah?
Uh-oh.
Does that
Yes,
affect anybody on this call?
It is Hanukkah.
Yes, it is. So are we okay with that, or do we want to reschedule? that I have to confess, the 22nd is my anniversary, so that wouldn't work for me. But we could, all right, do we want to do another? Oh boy, yeah, because the previous week is it's Thanksgiving.
All right, just do the next day. Can we do the 30th? Is it what day of Hanukkah? Is it the
I think it's the first day.
first day? Oh, no.
So any thoughts about the 29th or the 30th?
Well, I can do either, but it feels a little disrespectful.
Okay, yeah.
But, you know, I can do either. I don't know about everybody else.
I know that we'll be having a ceremony here in the village, so I probably wouldn't be able to make it, at least right on time.
Would that be the menorah lighting?
Right.
Well, I wouldn't be able to make it either.
Would it be ridiculous to think about sometime during the day as opposed to an evening meeting? I'm getting the sense that it would be ridiculous to do that.
If it's 2 hours, maybe.
Yeah, I could do 1 hour. I could make that happen.
Mhm.
So we could try, I mean, what do people feel about sometime during the day on the 29th? Is that?
It's good with me.
It works.
Maybe like a lunch meeting?
Excuse me?
Maybe like a lunch meeting?
Yeah, want to do a brown bag, a virtual brown bag? So we'll say noon?
Sounds okay.
All right,
Do that.
good. We did it. So the 29th at noon, and we'll go as long as we can. You know, if it looks like people all have to bow out after an hour or an hour and a half, then we'll just revise the schedule, maybe schedule another meeting. Good.
That's the environmental sustainability one, right?
That's correct.
We're not going to be able to cover that in the 1 hour. So we might want to.
Maybe we should plan on 2 meetings, two
Yeah.
1-hour meetings.
Yeah, let's see how we do on the 29th. And if need be, then we'll reschedule something that day.
And are we going to plan? We're going to plan on trying to have our new members attend that meeting.
I believe so. And they do have to get accepted by the village board. That's the protocol, but I think we should be able to do that in that time. By that time.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that's all I have. Oh, I do have one other detail that we have to work out. The boards from the farmer's market and the library. I was going to pick them up at the next comprehensive plan committee meeting, which now we're doing virtually. So I guess I'll just make arrangements I'll make a trip and pick them up sometime in the next couple of weeks. But, you know, I've only got half the comments. You know, our intern was able to record the comments on the boards about halfway through. A lot more comments added, so I will.
Can we take pictures of them, like high resolution pictures of them and get them to you?
If someone's willing to do that, yeah. I mean, I've done it just on an iPhone. You know, if you just check when you take the picture to make sure that they're legible, that would work. I'd really appreciate that if someone's willing to take that on. If not, I can make the trip. But
Yeah, you know what, Peter, I'll try to do that and see where it takes us.
Okay, yeah, and just let me know. If it doesn't work, then I'll come down and get them.
There's lots of nice places to eat here.
Yeah, that's what I hear. I hear there's a lot of things to do.
Peter, could you call me tomorrow at some point?
Sure. Will do. All right.
Okay.
Anything else? All right, so next time, the 29th at noon, we're going to start to talk about questions of sustainability and resilience. I look forward to it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Bye, all.
you.
Everyone.
Bye. Have a good night.